Now, these are all chemical buffers. That's what these are, chemical buffers. Then at the bottom of the page, it says physiological buffering controls. That's what I was talking about a minute ago. The respiratory center can get rid of excess CO2, which gets rid of acid. And the kidneys can get rid of hydrogen ions or bicarbonate ions, which is what is formed in respiratory acidosis, to neutralize acids or bases. And hydroxide ions as well. Should put that in there as well. So physiological buffers are the long-term fixes. The chemical buffers are the short-term quick fixes that prevent you from dying from a glass of apple juice. And then the physiological buffering systems reconstitute the acid and base buffers. I'm going to start with the protein buffering system at the bottom there because it is the simplest to see and follow how they work. And then we'll work our way from bottom up. The protein buffering system is the base buffer is carboxyl, which is COOH, and the acid buffer is carboxylate, which is COO, negatively charged. So the base buffer, this is the protein buffering system. The base buffer is COOH. COOH combines with the hydroxide, which is the base, by giving up its hydrogen. The COOH gives up its hydrogen. So what we're left with is COO, negatively charged, and H2O, because the H here combined with the OH there to end up with water. You follow that? So COOH is carboxyl, and COO is carboxylate. The acid buffer just happens to be the leftover from the base buffer. So we're starting out with the acid buffer with COO, carboxylate. It combines with hydrogen, which is acid, to form COOH. So what do you see here is going on? Yes, the base buffer, when the base buffer takes base out, it becomes the acid buffer. When the acid buffer takes acid out, it becomes the base buffer. You follow that concept? The base buffer neutralizes base and becomes the acid buffer. The acid buffer carboxylate, when it neutralizes acid, becomes the base buffer. So what's happening is this. You've got acid buffer here and base buffer here. Equal amounts of both floating around in the plasma of the blood. This is the acid buffer. If you drink the apple juice, you're reducing the amount of acid buffer and converting it to base buffer. And if you run out of acid buffer, that's when you go into acidosis. Then conversely, if you start drinking milk of magnesia, you start converting the base buffer, you start consuming the base buffer over here, diminishing the base buffer and converting it to the acid buffer. And if you run out of base buffer, then the pH of the blood goes skyrocketing up.
So is that why when they're using baking soda that neutralizes the acid? Is that why?
Yes.
Okay, got it.
Best thing to clean your battery terminals is baking soda and water, because that's acid, sulfuric acid. So the acid buffer and the base buffer are related to one another. When you use up one, you create more of the other. Okay, and that's the case in each and every one of these three instances. The same thing is happening in all these cases, except we're using different substances as the chemical buffer for the acid and the chemical buffer for the base. So let's go to the next one, and hopefully it'll start to make sense. We're going to go to the phosphate buffering system. And the two components of the phosphate buffering system, the base buffer is dihydrogen phosphate and the acid buffer is monohydrogen phosphate. Dihydrogen meaning two hydrogens, monohydrogen meaning one. So the base buffer is dihydrogen phosphate, H2PO4. It's a -2, but I'm not concerned about the valence. The base buffer combines with base, OH, and it gives up one of its hydrogens. It's got two, H2. It gives up one of its hydrogens to form HPO4 and water again. Because one of these hydrogens unites with the hydroxide, creating water. The acid buffer is monohydrogen phosphate, HPO4. It combines with acid, hydrogen ion, to form H2PO4, which is the dihydrogen phosphate. So again, the base buffer combines with base to form the acid buffer. The acid buffer combines with acid to form the base buffer. Yin and yang, okay? And then the last buffer system is the bicarbonate buffer system. And the base buffer is carbonic acid, which is H2CO3. It combines with the base, OH, to form HCO3 minus plus water, because it gives up one of its hydrogens to form water. The acid buffer in HCO3 is bicarbonate. The acid buffer is bicarbonate, HCO3. It combines with hydrogen to form H2CO3, carbonic acid. So in each and every case, the acid buffer sucks up one hydrogen. The base buffer releases one hydrogen to let it form with the hydroxide to make water. And in each case, the base buffer becomes the acid buffer, and the acid buffer becomes the base buffer. Now, if I ask you to describe one of these buffer systems. Let's say, describe the protein buffering system. You can do it two different ways. You can say the base buffer is carboxyl. It combines with hydroxide to form carboxylate and water. The acid buffer is carboxylate. It combines with acid to form carboxyl. You can do it in words. Or you can write what's on the board right there. Base buffer COOH plus OH forms COOO plus H2O. As long as you identify which is the base buffer and which is the acid buffer, and you include the components, I don't care which way you do it, whatever floats your boat. But you need to know all three of the buffering systems. And you need to know that those are chemical buffers, whereas the kidneys and the respiratory center are physiological. They're the longer term fixes to the acid-base issue, because they ultimately, see, the buffering system doesn't really get rid of the acid and base, it simply converts it to something else. But the kidneys actually get rid of it. You know, it goes out of your body. Or the respiratory center gets rid of the excess CO2, sending the acid out of your body. So the buffering systems are just a short-term fix, where the physiological buffers are the more permanent fix. They reestablish the buffering capacity. So if you use up all your acid buffer, it goes through the kidneys, and now you've got equal amounts of buffer of both. So as long as you don't drink apple juice faster than your kidneys can dump the hydrogen ions, you're okay. But you yes?
I was going to say, I'm a little surprised that your digestive tract doesn't play a greater role in kind of regulating or guarding the acid-base relationship of food that is acidic or basic being into the blood.
All ions don't just freely flow into the blood. There's a lot of mitigated pathways across those membranes. So there is some control, but not enough control that you can't overwhelm it. And you have to remember that just a milliliter of acid has trillions of hydrogen ions. It's just really a high concentrate, high number. And it doesn't take a huge number to overwhelm. And like I said, the biggest problem with pH is not what you consume, it's your respiration system being impaired, respiratory acidosis. And that's occurring right in the blood itself. It's creating the acid in the blood. You don't see on the front page, Johnny died of apple juice overdose. Okay. You don't see that.
So if someone drowns, that aside from not getting oxygen, they're also dying of acidosis?
Yeah, because until a cell dies, it's cranking out CO2, and it's just in it. When you got 1 trillion cells making CO2, that's a lot of CO2 very quickly. And in very short order, it will overwhelm the buffering system of the blood. Kidneys can't filter it fast enough, and you're in acidosis.
What is it when doctors get the bends? Is that related at all?
The bends is when you scuba dive and go down in deep ocean water, what happens is nitrogen, which is the major part of our air, 70% nitrogen, 20% oxygen, 79% nitrogen, 20% oxygen, and 0.4% CO2. Nitrogen is kind of a non-player in biological systems, but as the pressure builds up on your body, nitrogen then diffuses into your blood, where it normally wouldn't diffuse into your blood. And it diffuses into your blood at a significant amount. And as you come back up, then that nitrogen diffuses out of your blood, but you have to surface slowly, because if you go down to a couple of 100 feet and stay down there for a period of time, you're increasing the amount of nitrogen in your blood, And it's just a free gas that's being compressed into your blood. And if you were to surface quickly, what happens is the nitrogen can't get out fast enough, and it actually begins to boil in your blood, and it's extremely painful. So the bends is nitrogen narcosis. And what you have to do is come up 50 feet and stay there for 10 minutes and let the nitrogen purge out naturally. And then come up another 50 feet and stay there for 15 minutes or however long to get that nitrogen out of your bloodstream. And if you do that, then you're going to be okay when you hit the surface. But if you bolt from the bottom up, you're going to get yourself in trouble. That's generally not a problem because one tank of air you cannot get yourself into nitrogen narcosis with, because as you go down, if you have a full tank of air at 20 feet, you can stay underwater for 45 minutes or so. If you're at 100 feet, you can only stay down for like 10 minutes because the pressure builds up on the air in the tank as well, diminishing the amount of air that's available to you. So no matter how deep you go, one tank won't allow you to stay down there long enough. So it's mostly professional divers that have to worry about that, not your average scuba diver. But that's what that's all about. So if you got someone, okay, you're the physician in charge in the emergency department. They're rushing this guy in. He's having a heart attack. You check his blood and he's in acidosis. What are you going to do? Dead. You killed him. He's dead.
Why?
What are you going to do?
Sodium bicarbonate.
Bicarbonate
Oh.
to neutralize the acid. What do we got in our blood? Bicarbonate. And of course, it's in the blood. It's actually sodium bicarbonate because sodium combines with the bicarbonate. But we left the other components out to make it easier to see. So you give them nature's buffer. Okay, is what you're doing. So you give them a shot of sodium bicarbonate, that reestablishes the pH of the blood. Now you can fix his heart attack. So if you understand blood chemistry, then other things fall into place. That's why it's important to understand this. And as you look at the top of the page there, you see all kinds of sources of acids in the body, but not any sources of base or hydroxide. Anaerobic catabolism forms lactic acid. Oxidation of sulfur amino acids forms sulfuric acid. Oxidation of fatty acids forms acetic ketones. Hydrolysis of proteins and nucleic acids forms phosphoric acid. So it's acid, acid, acid. None of which usually become significant as far as acidosis go, but all could be a contributor when you're getting into respiratory acidosis. You know, if you could think about how much carbon dioxide you exhale, if you could measure it in every breath, and then start adding that up when you stop breathing, it becomes significant very quickly. Or when you have restricted breathing, you know, restricted blood flow, like in a heart attack. So, are we okay with this now? Don't be scared because it's chemistry. It's very logical, straightforward, and each one behaves exactly the same way as the other one. They all function the same way. The base buffer neutralizes the hydroxide by forming water. The acid buffer neutralizes hydrogen ions by taking them out of solution.